I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar series called Generative Entrepreneur. This is where we talk to our founders, our executives, and our developers to help them accelerate their generative AI applications to market and to deploy them to production at scale. Today's session is called Generative AIOps Playbook, and this is to help you unblock your POC workloads and move them into production. My name is Jason Virtue, and I'm a principal AI partner solution architect at Microsoft. I work within the GPS Americas division, and I help our partners both build and deploy production grade applications. In today's session, we'll be covering the Generative AI Ops Playbook. These will be our agenda items where we'll cover the life cycle, the different tools you use when building out those applications. We'll do a demonstration for the majority of this webinar, and then we'll share the CI/CD pipeline so we can understand how we can deploy these to production. And lastly, we'll share with you a set of learning resources called the Generative AI Playbook. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of today's session. Let's jump into the life cycle and talk about its overall capabilities. What we really want you to understand is this is an agile workflow, and this model that you see in front of you is really a conceptual model. These different phases, the 4 phases that sit out there, is not an industry standard that's been developed by Microsoft or any other organization. We use this depiction to help you understand the workflow and help us showcase that user experience. So let's jump in and talk about the personas, the tools, and the assets that we're building. We'll first start off with the first phase called prototype, and that's where we actually are empowering our business units to build out these generative AI applications as a POC. These users will take the AI Foundry playground and start to experiment within that playground to add questions and to evaluate those to see the accuracy of those models, not from a quantitative but a qualitative process. These ad hoc questions will help them start to learn the capabilities of those models and to see if they're actually applicable to the given business use case that they're trying to work on. And if so, they can use that from a prototyping perspective to get justification, prioritization, to bring those into the development phase. Now, the core thing about prototype is this is a business user run initiative. And after prioritization, we can then hand that baton over to the developers. One way I do this is through what we call a hackathon. And in that hackathon, we have many business units who are set up as individual project teams. And we have the executive teams or the steering committees who are there to evaluate every project and to see which ones are the winners and which ones should actually be brought into development. And that's where we go next. Our developer gets the baton from the business units. And here in the development phase, they want to use code first tools, things such as VS Code or Prompty or Semantic Kernel, to build out their generative AI applications. They too will be using a similar set of ad hoc questions out there to manually evaluate the quality of those models, but they'll be building out assets such as our prompt scripts, choosing the best models for the job, building out a RAG-based architecture, understanding how to chunk that data, how to index that data, and what are the best sources that sit out there, and also building both the applications and some of the orchestration software. Those developers will be unit testing their data throughout that life cycle to see if it actually makes sense, but they won't be doing any end-to-end testing. They're just wanting to make sure that each and every one of the different assets is functional. We will cover the other 2 phases in part 2 of our webinar series. Now let's jump into a definition of terms so we can all have the same reference point and be on the same page. There's many different DevOps life cycles, and you can see the ones listed here. The one we'll focus on is the GenAIOps component, where application developers will integrate LLM models into their applications. That's really what we'll be talking about in today's session. In particular, workloads that are with chatbots or what we call chat with your data, or Copilot applications. So let's now finalize, and before we jump into our demo, what are the tools to trade that we'll be using when building out these applications? One of the core things we'll be using is Azure AI Foundry. And the Azure AI Foundry has a chat playground that we can pre-provision through some different Azure AZD AI templates that allow us to set up our environments for our business users to start to work and build out their POCs. But as we get into our developers, they're going to start to build out the search indexes. They'll potentially fine tune some of those models with Azure ML Studio. They'll build out the different chat files through Prompty. They'll even potentially build out some of the orchestration capabilities through PromptFlow, LangChain, or Semantic Kernel. Once they're done with their production workloads and are ready to deploy those workloads, they'll then jump into GitHub Actions, Azure Monitor, or Application Insights as tools to make sure that those applications are being monitoring online. Now let's showcase our developer experience. The reason why I put this image here of E equals MC squared is I want to reassure you that you do not have to have an advanced mathematics degree to build generative AI applications. We can reuse our same application developers who have built our enterprise applications or our web-based applications when building generative AI applications. So where I will jump into next is showcasing these developer experience through the generative AIOps lifecycle. And this will be part one. So let's start this story from a business executive perspective. I, as an executive, have been ideating and thinking through all the different use cases, either through business processes or business applications, where I can integrate generative AI technology into those systems. One of them that came to my mind was a Contoso outdoor e-commerce site. Here, I would love to try to replicate our brick and mortar strategy where we have retail associates who are actually working with customers to help upsell and cross-sell them and expedite their buying behaviors. I'd like to take and replicate that through a virtual assistant that I can bring into my e-commerce site that can help me increase my overall order size. And by doing that, I'm confident that if I can prove this out, that our CFO will approve this for funding. So I would love to prototype this solution and see how this would work in our platform. Credit to our cloud developers who have created a lot of this demo content, and that is Seth Juarez, Nietzsche Narison, Pamela Fox, and Dan Taylor. I will put their links to their GitHub repos in the comments below. So let's go to the end and show you this actual website so you can get a sense for what it is. The Contoso Outdoor Company has a great set of visualizations on tents, backpacks, hiking clothes, footwear, camping tables and stoves, and many other items. This website's rich with information and has really great cutting edge visuals on the outdoor equipment that we're selling through this site. The headache is the amount of time it would take to find the information that you need. And what we would like to do is expedite that through this virtual assistant. So we go into the virtual assistants and we maybe ask a simple question like, how do I clean my tents? I ask that question. I can quickly see from this answer here, the answer that we got from the overall assistant, and we can see that this is a really logical answer that it gave me. Now, what I like to do is follow that up with a factual question to see which ones are waterproof. Now, we can see through this actual answer here that it's telling me that both the Skyview and the Alpine tents are waterproof tents. So far, this is great. I'll ask just a counterfactual question and say, can Now we know from this description that it's a two-person tent, but I'm curious on what type of answer that would give me for this. And when we see here, it actually says it's perfect for two people, but it might be a little bit cramped for 4. So we can see that this actual chat virtual assistant is actually giving some really great information to our customers. And I, as an executive, would be really willing to to approve this. Now, this is the end state. Let's start with the prototype so we can get a sense for what we're working with. I, as a business executive, and myself as a partner solution architect, when working with our partners, I typically set up a hackathon where I have all our different business units as individual teams, and those teams work in the AI Foundry in incubating their business ideas. They use the AI Foundry and the playground to start to validate if the actual use cases are feasible or not. In AI Foundry, we have a construct uh, called AI Hub. And in that AI Hub, we have a series of projects. And typically, when I go into um, our partner accounts, I'll have them pre-provision this environment with a set of projects, and each project's different groups will have ownerships too. And when we open up a project in the Foundry, this is where we'll pre-provision a set of models and connected resources so those executives can start to leverage those when they get started. All they'll need to do, and now I'll put my business executive hat on, is go into that playground and try the chat playground. Now, I, as a business executive, am looking for a low code tool. This AI Foundry Playground will help support that. What's really nice about this is if I go into this overall playground environment, I can see from the deployment perspective that I have a series of pre provisioned models I can potentially leverage. I'll keep it at the turbo model for this particular component. I also have model instructions I can give it. Here I'm saying let's just be a helpful AI assistant. But I also have the ability just to give our actual um, business executives more context of how we can control the safety of our models. We can create a system message that'll help avoid harmful content. Now, once the executive has made these changes, they can apply them, and so I'll apply these changes to that model. But if they would go and ask questions right now, all of our models are trained on the internet, so we need to provide some personal data. And I, as a um, support team, have come in here and pre-provision some search indexes, which take product information and index that. So we can see we have Contoso products, which is a list of all the products on our e-commerce site. And I've set up a series of different indexes that are out there, be it keyword or hybrid or semantic. We can pick all above if we want to. So now you can see this is a really easy setup for the user, help them understand the capabilities of the model, some of the design patterns that they need to think through, and more importantly, as they start asking these questions, it'll start showing them the power of these models and also the limitations. So I'll go in here and simulate some of the same questions I asked earlier. We can see here I asked, how do I clean a tent? And we can see that the response maybe is a little bit sluggish. So this will be a good thing to also help them understand the performance of these models along with the responses. So we can see here shortly, it'll come back and give me uh, the actual response. It's kind of interesting that's waiting here. As you can see, it then started outlining the different capabilities of or different ways of cleaning a tent. I can also now ask, and just like before, I'm asking what tents are waterproof. It now will hopefully give me a list of tents that are waterproof. And through these different Q&A prompts, I'm manually evaluating them to understand if these prompts are actually useful or not. Now, if I want to be more systematic, I can come in here and look at some of the different prompt samples that I can add into my system messages, or I can create my own prompt flow to develop an orchestration tool. I can even potentially deploy this as a website if we want to. Now, I think that's probably going a little bit too far for a POC, but the big thing we should do is evaluate these. So if I go into the evaluation component, I now will see the ability to import a standard set of questions, or what we will call test cases, into the overall environment. So I will upload my JSON lines file. In my JSON's lines file, you will see that it has a set of queries and truth, and I'll map them to say which one is my question and which one is my ground truth. So you can see here's that outline. My input is query, my response is truth. I now will add that mapping. And you can see from my overall list, each input, each question, we had 13 in total. I will not run this right now, but we can run them collectively. And then when we talk about evaluation, I manually, through my qualitative process, not quantitative, but qualitative, will judge if those responses resemble the ground truth. And I can use a thumbs up or thumbs down to do that. So let me show you a final version so you can see this in action. So I go under manual evaluation. And again, this is where I, as a business user, can now start to use the tool to gain confidence in the capabilities of these models. So you can see it saves both the system message, the configuration, and the indexes that we used or the data. And it lists out every output that was generated by the model. I, prior to opening this, had gone in and gave a thumbs up or down to each one of these different responses based on my opinion on the quality of that response. And you can see I have about a 61% positive rating to the quality of these models. Probably not a winning solution as of today, but definitely noteworthy enough to move it to the next phase of development and hand this over to the developer team to see if they can work with the system message, the models, the parameters, and other configurations to see if they can improve the performance of these overall models. So let me hand this over to the developer. Let's start the second phase of our generative AI ops lifecycle, and that's development. I, as a developer, want to use a code-first tool that allow me to build out my generative AI application. You can see I'm using VS Code, and VS Code allows me to start building out the code set in the tool of my choice. To do this, one of the first things I'm going to need to do is set up an extension called the AI Toolkit. This will be one of the primary extensions you'll use along with prompt flow. If we set these two up, we can then clone our repo and bring that code set over to our local machine and start our experimentation. When it comes to the overall environment, you can see here, I have a series of different RAG assets that I've built out here. And those RAG assets were things that Dan Taylor had created, and I forked his repo. You can see some of the different assets that we'll be covering. And one of the core things we'll want to leverage is our chat evaluation JSON line files. Here we can see the set of questions that are out there and some of the ground truth, and this will be what we'll use to evaluate our results. We also will be using some of our Python scripts that sit out there. And in this Python script, we're actually using the AI Foundry SDK to connect into our project and to create both an embedding and chat client. With that, I can then search my index, and that index I'll pass into the user query. But before I pass in the raw query from the user, I'll first put that into a LLM model to determine what are the keywords that I should submit into my search index. And the intent mapping is my prompty file that will enable me to do this. Now, in this prompty file, we can see we have a configuration to use the GPT-4o model and also my system instructions. And with those system instructions, I give it some examples and also how I'm going to be submitting my prompt. This is really critical that we create a prompty file. or a configuration file. It's independent of my Python script so that I can make those changes independent of the code set. Now, my second process is once I get those documents that are retrieved from the search index, now I want to add this to my prompt as the context to ground my models. In this chat model, just like the other one, we're using the same type of SDK environment that sits out there. And I'm creating a client that connects into my project and that actually does my chat completion component. And here I'm using a different prompty file. In this prompty file, I'm actually using the same model. You can see the GPT-4 model, but I have a different system message and an actual different format for my context windows. And this is what I would submit into my overall window. If you look here, I'll run two things. I'll first run our get product documentation. This will be my search query where I will ask it for the list of documents that need to come back. Now, what's really interesting here is it shows me, and we'll see if I'm able to get this fully, the intent. The user is looking for four recommendations for a tent that will accommodate four people. That's a user question. But this is the keyword that was brought into the search index. And what's nice is it retrieves 5 documents and then it lists out each document with the description that came with that document along with a citation. Now, that information can get passed into my next query, and that next query will be my chat with products query. And here, I will ask the same question about the 4 tents. And here you can see I asked what tents are the 4 recommended tents. And since we've seen this a few times, hopefully you remember the TriMaster 4 is a tent that it recommends, and it gives the reason for recommending this overall tent. So hopefully that gave you a lot of context on that developer experience and how we can use the CLI to interact with those large language models, some of the extensions that we needed to set up our environment, and the code set that we actually built. In our next phase, we'll go into the evaluation components. So that was a conclusion of our showcase for part 1 of the series. In part 2, we'll cover both the experimentation phase and the operations phase. But we really want to thank you for attending today's session, and we will continue in part 2 to show you those other components. Thank you for watching, and really look forward to our next session.